Watch this.
A new voter initiative has been approved for November's ballot. It would try to raise millions for education in Idaho by raising taxes on the rich. But now there are almost as many questions about how the funding would affect the rest of Idaho's taxpayers. It's helped keep Boise and other cities along the river from flooding for nearly 7 decades. And it looks like Lucky Peak could last another 7, and these steps have a hand in determining that. After 3 weeks of world-class cycling through the French countryside, Boise's Matteo Jorgensen is officially a Tour de France finisher. A finish better than anyone expected. It started out as a simple solution to Idaho's education funding problem. Raise taxes for the wealthiest Idahoans to hopefully lift the state out of the last spot in money spent per student in the country. So Reclaim Idaho put together a campaign to get an initiative on the November ballot that would do just that. And then they did. On Friday, the Secretary of State's office officially certified the signatures needed to get the petition on the general election ballot, something voters would decide if they like the idea or not. Turns out, though, it won't be that simple, because over the weekend, questions began to surface about the language of the petition. Just raise taxes on Idaho's top earners? Not really. Critics have pointed out, contrary to what Reclaim Idaho claims. Could it be open to interpretation, or should it be open to interpretation? Well, Joe Paris got an official interpretation from the Secretary of State and the AG's office.
It was a celebration for Reclaim Idaho back on Friday. After delivering about 100,000 signatures to the Secretary of State's office earlier in the year, Reclaim Idaho's Quality Education Initiative was officially certified for the November ballot. The goal is to create a new tax bracket for any person earning more than $250,000 to help raise extra funds to invest in Idaho education. However, critics are now asking if that's the only thing the initiative will do. If you look closely at the language of the initiative, you may notice the tax rates listed for each tax bracket that reflect the rates prior to the legislature's tax cut this past session. For example, the current top bracket is now taxed at 6%, not the former 6.5% listed on the petition. Now, the language here was drafted before that was all passed, but it does beg the question, if the initiative does pass a citizen vote, does it raise taxes to the former rates, overriding the recent tax cut? Chief Deputy Secretary of State Chad Houck explains.
We asked that question of the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office response was effectively, if it is enacted the way it is drafted, it would disregard those 2022 tax cuts.
The timing of the situation is tricky. Reclaim Idaho was well into their campaign when the tax rates changed, so those new rates are not on the initiative. But can that language simply be updated by the Secretary of State's office or maybe even the Attorney General before ballots are printed in November?
And the answer there again was no. The language was circulated in front of petitioners. The language that was circulated is the language that will go in the informational pamphlets that will go out to voters from our office in the coming months. So ultimately, back to the question, if enacted as drafted, will it disregard? It appears that it would disregard those 2022 tax cuts.
We think it's a simple, basic misreading to think that this initiative will do anything more than that.
Luke Mayville, co-founder of Reclaim Idaho, says he thinks that analysis is a misread. He points to the fact that the language they wanted to add and remove to state law are underlined and crossed out respectively. The tax bracket section is untouched, except for creating another tax bracket at $250,000.
It's really baffling, really, to hear this opinion from the Secretary of State because it's just a basic misreading of how legislation works. We've consulted with the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Jim Jones. He's told us that we're clearly correct, that all this initiative provides for is for tax increases over the amount of $250,000 a year.
Still, Houck says the guidance they've been given from the AG's office is that if the initiative passes, the entire text would be enacted, not just underlined portions.
We certainly can't change the way it was drafted once it's been certified. The Attorney General's office can't change the way it's drafted once it's certified. The drafters could have pulled the petition and changed the way it's drafted if they wanted to at some point in time, but it would have meant that they would have had to start over. So ultimately, they made the decision not to pull the initiative after the tax cuts were put in place.
Mayville says the petition makes it very clear in multiple sections that the only intent of the initiative is to ask voters to add a tax bracket, not alter the tax cut the legislature passed.
The petition also includes a long ballot title. It includes a funding source statement. It includes a fiscal note. All of these documents make very clear that it's only income over $250,000 a year that would be taxed by this initiative, in addition to restoring the corporate income tax rate.
In the end, though, Reclaim Idaho will have to get a higher power to side with them. As it stands, the guidance from the AG's office seems clear. All language is up for vote, not just the underlined portions.
The only definitive statement on these questions would be the court. And if the legislature or Secretary of State or any government agency wants to undermine the intention of our initiative, we are prepared to take it to court, and we're very confident that we would prevail in court.
So if you hear that, Brian, we could assume this is going to end up in a courtroom, and a judge in the end will get to probably decide on, is it the underlined portion we're voting on here, or is it the whole thing? So there are questions now. What are the scenarios? How could this play out? Well, there's a scenario where this gets on the ballot in November and it doesn't pass, and then none of this matters. It fails. There's a scenario, though, where it does pass in November, and then you would have, depending on what a court says, you would have the tax code potentially reshifted to what it says in the petition based on what the AG's office and the Secretary of State says. So at that point, yes, the tax rates would change from the highest bracket, for example, from 6% right now. It would go back to 6.5% according to the AG's office. There are some options, though. The legislature, when they come back in January, could immediately write some bills to fix the code, or they could fix the entire situation. There's another whole scenario here where this does pass. The legislature comes back and they say, no, we're going to actually veto this citizen initiative, 2/3 vote, we're going to get rid of it. And there is precedent for this in Idaho. There was term limits that were passed on a citizen initiative.
Right.
That was vetoed. That was overrode by the state legislature. So there's a lot of different ways this could play out. We'll just really have to wait and watch.
You just described 4 different scenarios, I believe. And I guess that last one you said they could just handle it through legislation. That hasn't happened so far, so I can probably bet that that one's way down on the list of possibilities of legislators, lawmakers saying, let's just take care of it ourselves. So again, I guess we're just waiting to see. We do know that Idaho's going to be spending a little bit more when it comes to costs in court. Because that's definitely where this thing's headed.
What did I say last week? 4 words. See you in court.
See you in court.
It's on a t-shirt, 208.com.
Second week in a row. Thanks, Joe. Meanwhile, former state representative Aaron Von Ehlinger, well, he got a little bit of a reprieve this morning. He's supposed to be sentenced this week for his rape conviction for assaulting a 19-year-old State House staffer last year. Well, since his conviction in April of this year, Von Ehlinger has been trying to get a retrial. And without an answer to that question, he asked the judge another question, if he could postpone his sentencing hearing. Well, he got the postponement, but he's still waiting on an answer about a possible new trial. Von Ehlinger's defense attorney, John Cox, says there was insufficient evidence, that's quoting him, to convict Von Ehlinger. Cox also filed to have Von Ehlinger released on his own recognizance as the judge worked out all the details pertaining to the possible retrial, but the judge has simply denied that request, and he's been hanging out in the Ada County Jail ever since. His defense team says they plan to file a motion for a new trial by August 4th, and once that is submitted, the state will have until August 16th to respond to that. Despite the conviction, Von Ehlinger has maintained he's innocent, saying the encounter was consensual. All right, how's that rent bill been for you lately? A number you're pretty much happy with? Well, there's a chance, it has been for a while, that it's gone up and, well, probably more than you're willing to pay or want to pay. Rental assistance nonprofit Jesse Tree says the average Idaho or Ada County rent has increased 73% from 2015 to 2021. 73% in just 6 years. In that same time span, Ada County wages have just increased by just 18%. Problems like these prompted a lot of messages from viewers, but like this one, specifically, why don't you guys cover the housing crisis issues, as we put it? Rent prices are way over what they should be. Landlords are gouging. 208, that's addressed to us, I guess, right there. So we have talked about this several times. Andrew Bartline specifically has covered this several times for KTVB. And just recently, you've come across some good news when it comes to rental prices in Idaho or Ada County specifically?
Yeah, well, there's the bad news, which is rent is continuing to go up. A lot of people will tell you that firsthand. A lot of people renewing their leases in the summer. But there's a little bit of a change that might help some renters. Now, inflation's very visible here in Idaho, and that's being reflected on these rent increases lease to lease. One local Boise renter says he was able to negotiate his new lease and actually get it down compared to what they wanted to charge him. Shane Mulhern's apartment complex notified him that his new lease would increase by 15% for the next year, a number he felt was a little too high, so he did a little research and concluded, based on similar units in his area, that his rent should only increase by about 7%. That's a number he felt was fair. Most unique part of it all, the apartment complex gave him the option to submit a counteroffer, and of course, that's exactly what he did.
They sent a proposal that was, I think it was like 15% increase, and but in the offer where they mentioned that they actually opened up that we could counter. And so, like I said, it was kind of open process. It wasn't very contentious. The housing market's kind of crazy here, so it wasn't shocking. Just figured if there was an opportunity to come out with a counter and maybe get a little lower rent, it was worth taking the effort to do that. Let's start around 7 and see where we go from there, and they accepted that.
Jesse Tree says they have not seen landlords, especially large apartment complexes with national ownership groups, which there are a lot of those in Boise, open up that conversation to negotiate. That's a very rare situation. So the story gives them hope that perhaps this is becoming more of a norm. However, it's more likely that you, the renter, will have to open up this conversation to negotiate on your own. Jesse Tree says it's all about having an established relationship with the landlord or property manager to get there.
Build that relationship, I think, and be a really good communicator. Show that you're taking care of the rental and the place. And I think if a tenant does all of that, it's going to be a lot easier for them to broach a negotiation conversation later. So if they see a rent increase that they can't afford, I encourage them to go to their landlord in person, if possible. Face-to-face is always better, to try to talk through the situation and explain to the landlord what's possible for their budget, why they want to stay in the unit, and how they're going to be a good tenant.
Now, whether Shane planned for this or not, that's kind of exactly what he did. He has a good established relationship with his landlord. He says he has a history of being a good tenant at that apartment complex specifically. And in his negotiation, he explained how he arrived at 7%, why he thinks that's a fair number, and why that's a number that would fit his budget. So, just because there's 10 people lined up that are probably ready to take your apartment, as we've already reported, there's 1% vacancy rate in Ada County and Canyon County. So there's not a lot of options. People are lining up to take those apartments. But if you're a good tenant, you have a relationship, you do have some options.
I can say, I can't imagine this means that the leverage is now going back toward the tenant as opposed to the landlord in this situation. We saw through the pandemic, we had the rents probably stabilized by a lot of people because of the pandemic, but we're kind of coming out of that. But as you mentioned, there's a little long list of people who would take your place gladly. But there's a process to that. So landlords would think, why would I want to go through the hassle of finding somebody else, putting all the, when I got somebody in? Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, if you have a good relationship, your odds are better.
All right. Thanks, Andrew. It's an interesting part of that. Appreciate it. About a week ago, we did a quick story on some stone steps found along Warm Springs Avenue. Carriage stones, they're called, and they were for people's ease of getting into horse-drawn carriages before cars came along. Anyway, those steps sparked this question from Steve last week. On the face of Lucky Peak Dam, where it says, "Keep Idaho green," there are steps, all different lengths going across the dam. What are these steps for, Steve asks. Thanks for letting us know. And of course, he addressed it to the two, which you like to do. We're going to accept what we assume is his autocorrect spelling of the word dam, first of all, but we won't accept his interpretation of what it says on the face of Lucky Peak Dam. It's not keep Idaho green, but it's keep your forest green. It's part of the Gooberif campaign of the 1950s. What's a Gooberif? Well, that's a question we answered a couple years ago, and you can find that answer at KTVB.com. But what about Steve's question about those steps? Construction began on the Lucky Peak Dam in 1949, funded by the Flood Control Act of 1946 to, well, control flooding along the Boise River. Basically, piles of dirt were rolled and packed more than 250 feet above the stream bed. Just 30 feet wide at the top, it's much wider toward the bottom. It was dedicated in June of 1955, a dam well built to hold more than 260,000 acre-feet of water. So how does the dam do that? How can the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers make sure it's all still holding strong? Well, that's where these steps come in. Maintenance workers use those steps to conduct weekly and monthly inspections. So do they just climb down and look for leaks? Well, no. Inside the dam, there are these pressure points, what they call piezometer wells. The Army Corps of Engineers tells us these wells monitor the water table in specific areas of the dam, and those steps, well, they only need to go as far as those wells. And so far, so well. As we learned a couple of years ago, even after a 6.5 magnitude quake centered in central Idaho and felt as far away as Boise, the 67-year-old earthen dam is holding together, well, pretty damn well. You know, we did a story about the status of Lucky Peak's structure after that quake, and the Army Corps of Engineers says it is solid and it is safe. They tell us, in addition to those weekly and monthly pressure point checks, they do a formal inspection of the dam every 5 years, finishing the last one back in 2019. At the time of its construction, Lucky Peak Dam cost roughly $19 million to complete, which would be about $220 million, more than $220 million in today's dollars. And accordingly, it's been money well spent because apparently the Lucky Peak Dam has stopped nearly $2.4 billion in flood damages since 1961, and no doubt due to those steps. All right, peak of summer here in Idaho. So far, we've been able to avoid some major wildfires across the state, mostly because of, well, the rains that we saw in June kind of helped that. But for those of you who have lived here long enough, you know that likely the worst is still to come, which is why you see signs like, well, this one here all over the state, especially in wooded areas, though. Fire danger signs, usually updated every day to warn the risk of fire danger out and across the state. You can see in the picture there, it's low, but that was an old photo. It can change depending on the weather. Most of them are in the high to extreme category as of today. The mascot, the guy standing next to that sign, you notice him? Smokey Bear? Yeah, he's an American campaign icon, part of the longest running public service announcement, that is, campaign in U.S. history. But apparently he's missing from at least one of those signs. U.S. Forest Service says he went missing from the Sawtooth National Recreation Headquarters near Ketchum, and it happened on Saturday, July 16th, over a weekend. So if you see a cutout, original wood cutout, looks like that one right there. That's what he should look like. He's about 6.5 feet tall, which is pretty decent size for a wood cutout. 2.5 feet wide. They say someone had to actually take the time to remove that sign because there are large lug bolts and had to be removed with specialty tools. So if you know where that sign is of Smokey Bear, you have any information, maybe somebody's bragging about it in their garage, you're asked to contact the Forest Service Supervisor's office, and that information, you can see that on your screen right now. And remember, only you can help bring Smokey Bear home, right? Also this time of year, probably about the time you're thinking of, wow, a pool would be nice in the backyard if I could just start by digging that hole, or maybe just kind of stick your head inside the freezer for a few days. Triple-digit temperatures, more of them on the way. We've had quite a few already, but how many 100-degree days, well, would be normal in Idaho, or at least in the Treasure Valley? This is a question for meteorologist Bree Eggers, and we asked her to give us a history. How many of these triple-digit days do we usually see in the Gem State? Bree?
Hey, Brian, and since you mentioned the pool, I'm just going to say, as somebody born and raised in Idaho, the stock tank in the backyard filled up with cool water.
Stock tank, there you go.
Also helps to cool you down. Yeah, that's the cool way to do it. All right, the hottest part of the year, because this is the part of the year when our average highs are at their hottest, 95 degrees. That's as hot as it gets as far as our average highs go for the Boise area. And if that's not hot enough for you, we're heading into another string of triple-digit days, at least according to my forecast here, with the temperature trend showing you how far above average. We're looking for at least 6 days of 100 degrees plus. We've already done that once this year, 6 consecutive days of triple-digit temperatures. The record for consecutive days of 100 degrees plus, 9 days. That's happened 4 times on record for Boise, and it happened last year, the hottest summer on record for the Boise area. And again, 6-day stretches already happened once this summer. It looks like we could probably do it again, and then even add more triple-digit days to that tally as we cruise into the month of August. We're not done with these hottest days of summer just yet. The average for our triple-digit days for Boise, at least according to our 30-year climatological averages, about 9 days. The record for the most happened in 2003, but oddly enough, our warmest or hottest summer on record last year, 2021, with 18 triple-digit days. For this year, if you're keeping track, we've already had 9 triple-digit days or high temperatures at 100 degrees or hotter. And as I mentioned before, adding at least another 6 to the tally, and quite possibly even more than that. So headed for records? Well, the forecast looks plenty hot enough, and you can find it at KTVB.com.
At 9, that number 9 seems low. But let's see that change over the next couple of years. It's not as hot as it is in Paris. I should say not as hot in Paris as it is around here. 81 degrees today. Balmy 88, though, yesterday at the finish line of the Tour de France. 3 weeks of intense cycling throughout the French countryside. We sure hope Boise's Matteo Jorgensen is enjoying some R&R today, because yesterday he crossed that finish line in 24th place, which out of 135 riders, pretty impressive. After 21 stages, the 23-year-old Boise High grad finished in 21st place overall, first on his team, by the way, something he was not expecting to do. His goal was to just play the support role to his team's ace. But unfortunately, well, the ace had to withdraw from the race with just 3 stages left, after which he came down with COVID. So guess what? Jorgensen stepped up and finished just off the podium twice. He also had a 5th place finish. Mind you, this is after a crash on stage 3 that left him with several stitches. So what lessons is this young man taking away from his first Tour de France?
Definitely some self-confidence. Yeah, just that I think I have the potential in the future to win stages here, and yeah, it's given me a ton of confidence, to be honest with you. I mean, it's just the biggest race in the world, so there's just a lot of people watching, and so it adds kind of, yeah, a little bit of motivation to everyone, pressure and energy, and yeah, it just makes everything a little bit nicer.
Okay, so what's next? Well, we don't know what's next, but we know what he's doing now. We spoke to Matteo's mom, who said he is back in Nice trying to get, again, to recover from that race. That's his home away from home, but he says he'll be back in Boise, should be back by the end of August for a visit. All right, a lot of people pointing to our $1.4 billion surplus as a way to help education in Idaho, but the governor's already promised tax cuts. So we'll see what happens in January.